I think that people who embrace it and kind of learn how to use it now are going to be they're going to be set up for success going forward. And I do think that they'll be able to take a greater market share in whatever industry they're in, because basically they're able to be more efficient.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the same as hiring like top of the line employees. When you give all of your employees access to these tools that give them greater leverage or greater efficiency, then they're going to be able to, like you said, focus more on the human to human element. They're going to be able to make more calls or more meetings, or spend more time face to face with their clients, instead of just basically sitting there doing data entry or looking through your documents for or parsing policies. Like being able to use AI for those things, I think, is like a really key use case.
Welcome back to another episode of the Keys to the Commonwealth podcast. I'm excited today for today's episode. We're going to talk a lot about a topic that has been, I would say, a big buzzword, to say the least, these days in just news, anything regarding tech space and so forth. But it really impacts everyone's businesses, from entrepreneurs to the businesses that we work in, and life in general. So without further ado, I want to introduce today's guest on the Keys to the Commonwealth podcast, Joseph Thacker. Joseph, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Obviously, we're in a remote, undisclosed location today. All jokes aside, Joseph is head of AI security, I would say. There's probably a better title for that, for a cybersecurity company called AppOmni. Full disclosure, he's also my brother-in-law, so we get to have a lot of these conversations, and I was like, really, I think this conversation needs to be something that happens more so that it just needs to be talked about more, as far as there's a lot of times people, I think, are unaware or afraid, or just in something they don't know, and so probably bringing some light to that in that respect, as far as a topic regarding AI, all the things that are how it's going to impact our businesses each and every day, and different space in that world. So without further ado, Joseph, hop back in the door and tell us how'd you get to where you are today, and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sweet. Well, first of all, thanks again. Yeah, it's awesome to be your brother-in-law and to watch you have grown in the both real estate and also insurance space, and so that's really cool. And I'm glad you're making content like this as well, because it helps a ton of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was originally doing software engineering.
Okay.
And then got interested in security and slowly made my way into doing cybersecurity. Initially, the first job was doing defensive stuff, and then got more offensive, where I was hacking websites and doing what's called bug bounty, which is where you basically get paid for finding bugs. And then,
if I remember right, you had kind of almost turned that into a whole other side career, just purposely hacking, and you get rewarded from companies to do so, I guess, to see if there's vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was rivaling my my day job, just like doing basically bug bounty hacking on targets, because it was really fun to me, felt like a game, but also helped secure Fortune 100 companies. So was doing that on the side.
Yeah, there were some definitely. I remember some big companies that you were end up we're hacking this company, or if I remember right, you even had one of the 3-letter agencies you were kind of working on, or exposing vulnerabilities. Maybe not 3-letter agencies, but some kind of government stuff too as well.
Yeah. I've had access to basically camera systems at the Pentagon, and hacked on Amazon and OpenAI and Google. And
I didn't know if some of that was to be able to disclose. That's why I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, it's mostly fine at this point. Yeah.
So came from a degree in computer science, programming, and so forth. Got into more of just bug bounty hunting and exposing vulnerabilities. And obviously this whole world of AI has just exploded, and you're kind of right at the forefront of being able to quickly sidestep into what is this, how is it going to play, especially from your business world of your day job being all about security. Yep. Obviously that exposed a lot more vulnerabilities in just everything we do in life, probably on a massive scale from what we were used to in that sense.
Yeah, that's what was most interesting to me. I think most people, even today, especially lay people, are really conflating the differences between AI safety and AI security. And maybe even these greater AI risks that we just need to think through as a culture and as a species, like the kind of job displacement aspect and things like that, disinformation. Yeah. Those aren't really necessarily AI security or AI safety, but they're important. But for me specifically, coming from that bug bounty and traditional security world, I was most interested in AI security initially. Yeah. And I had a few things go viral where I found some bugs in OpenAI, and that kind of was the impetus that kind of made me take off from the AI security perspective, and now I'm known kind of as the AI security guy in a few small circles. So.
Yeah, and with your company, obviously, what is your official title technically?
Yeah, I'm a principal AI engineer.
And you basically got to create the space I mean, and that's a weird thing to think about. Like, this AI almost created a whole new space of like jobs and so forth, like that type of thing.
Yeah, and I have a hot take that it'll go away eventually when we all just know how to use these AI tools.
Yeah.
But there'll definitely be a time span here where, there is need for AI engineers. There's probably going to be a big need for AI implementation experts.
Yeah.
I would say as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So we've obviously had a lot of these conversations, and especially back when the whole buzzword from, around the Thanksgiving, Christmas time period back in, what was it, 2022, I want to say, where OpenAI released their first things, and me and you were talking about this, and people were like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Kind of scenario. And just seeing what's possible has almost been a weird scenario for me, where it's like I've had to untrain my mind on what is possible in a lot of ways. Even in the sense of like, oh, well, can this thing do that? And I'm like, well, why don't I just ask that thing if it can do that? Because the idea is that it knows if it can do that or not, type of thing like that. So maybe for those who don't have a good grasp on what AI is, or think, obviously they're thinking Terminator movie or something along those lines, which who knows, maybe we're closer to that than we think. But brought over to you of what we're really talking about, what's kind of happened over the last probably 24 months, roughly, is to say, as far as that space of AI, especially with ChatGPT and some of those things that people are familiar with. Yeah,
I think you're right. There's a lot of confusion there, right? Because it's easy to think it can do things it cannot. There's a lot of people, that's what you were saying. And then there's also, it seems like people really split into two camps of like, no, of course AI can't do that, or I can do everything now. And of course it's somewhere in between, but it's changing quick too. So initially, back whenever ChatGPT kind of exploded, ChatGPT was based on GPT 3.5.
Yeah.
And so the buzz got started
version 3.5 basically, right? So that was the first integration that was really released to the public.
Yes.
And there was earlier models of that, I guess, that were not.
They were open to the public, but they just weren't good enough.
Okay.
GPT-3, I would say, started the buzz, but didn't get into the public sphere. Okay. And then ChatGPT used GPT 3.5, and it, of course, blew up, and it's the fastest growing SaaS app or app ever. And so I think that that's what really popularized it. At that point, I think people were very in those two camps we mentioned before, either very excited about it or very skeptical of it. And it made sense to be in both, because sometimes it would have these shining moments of like writing an entire code, like an entire application, the code for it in one go. And then other times it would feel like it would hallucinate things that didn't make any sense. It couldn't do 2 + 2, right? And so, and now I think, it's much more complicated, because each of these systems are attached to different tools. They use different models. Some are big, some are small, some are smart, some are specialized. And now it's getting kind of more difficult to keep up with. Yeah. But that initial blitz, I think, 2 years ago when ChatGPT dropped, was for me when everything changed. Okay. I used it, and all of a sudden I could immediately generate code that at work would have taken me hours to generate, and I could generate it in 10 seconds, right?
Yeah. And there's so many, it's like, when I talk about unlearning what I think is even plausible, it's like, I'm having to rethink through everything in my business, sometimes even my personal life, where I'm like, there's a use case in here type of scenario. Like, case in point, my wife, I was just talking to her and trying to explain some of this the other day to her, and I had mentioned this 1.5 years ago, and she finally kind of put it in practice. This example I told her about, and her lights and her, you can see, it's always funny when you show somebody some of the stuff, and their lights in their head go like, oh my gosh, Right. And then for her, I was like, you don't really, these calorie counters, me and her try to, watch maybe what we eat, macros, there's all this big thing with obviously, calorie counting, macros, protein, stuff like that. I was like, you can literally just plug in 12-pack of nuggets from Chick-fil-A with this sauce and a Coke Zero. Yep. And it will just, you can say, here's my goal weight of what I want to lose, or here's what my protein I want to hit, and boom, it'll just auto calculate it for you in a span of 3 seconds. Yep. Not even 3 seconds, like a second or something like that. And she was just like, wait, what type of scenario? I was like, yeah. I was like, you can literally just do anything you practically want with it. I mean, within reason. You can't like just, we don't have rosy robots from the Jetsons yet. I think that might be something that actually could be a possibility. Because again, back to retraining my mind, I'm like, what is really plausible? Right. Some of these things we always thought, maybe from a Star Wars, Star Trek scenario, were like impossibilities. Right. Like maybe not all of it, maybe some of it, but maybe not all of it type of scenario. So what about you as far as the use cases? Obviously you're doing that more from a security standpoint. Before we dive a little bit in more to that, what are some of the things that you've been able to kind of do or show people or kind of explain to people on this?
Yeah, the biggest thing, which I think is interesting to most people because of the implications, is I've definitely followed what I call the hackbot industry. So it kind of follows, if you want to think about it as like autonomous hacking, right? Yep. So can LLMs
Explain that real quick. By the way.
So
LLM.
Yes, LLM stands for large language model.
Right.
It's the most common form of AI these days. Some people who are in the AI and machine learning space kind of get offended by the fact that we call, ChatGPT or other LLMs, other large language models, AI, because they've been doing AI long before large language models were even invented.
And what are some of the other LLMs out there, just for reference sake at this point?
Well, that's a good
Most
question.
people, I think of ChatGPT, but there's really, Google obviously has, was it Bard? Or maybe,
the other large language models?
That people were kind of might experience within the workplace.
Yeah, I would say
the
next most popular is probably Claude, Anthropic.
Okay.
So the company is called Anthropic. Their app is called Claude.
Okay.
The same way OpenAI is called ChatGPT.
Yep.
And then it's actually not Bard anymore. It's Gemini. So
That's
Google's
right,
model
Gemini.
is called Gemini, and that's the name of like the app. That's not like the name
Right.
of their models under the hood.
Sure.
But then Meta has Llama.
Yep.
And there's different sizes of that and different versions, right? So, but Llama 3 is their most recent one.
Yeah.
But there are literally hundreds.
Yeah.
But the state of the art right now is ChatGPT 4 and Claude 3 Opus is the.
And that seems to be the most one that's integrated with a lot of other platforms, software online, different things of that nature. Am I right?
Yeah, and I would say the third most popular, and it might even be more popular than Claude 3 Opus, is probably Llama 3.
Yeah.
Because it's supported on Grok, which is the very fast inference.
Yep.
Basically, they created these new GPUs, these new processing units that can process AI models faster than a typical CPU or graphics processing card.
Yeah.
And so they're able to. I think they're called LPUs. I'm not an expert, but anyways, they can generate tokens way faster. And the biggest and best model on there is Llama 3.
Okay.
70 billion.
So that's kind of where we're at. So let's talk about where we're going. And when I say where we're going, we're talking about what's just 2 steps in front of us, because I think if we're thinking a year from now, it's hard to believe even what is possible. Because I've seen some kind of graphics lately where it talked about more or less, it showed one graphic of a small kind of like whale. It said that's through GPT 3.5. Here's a slightly killer whale. That one's model for 4.0 or whatever that one's called right now. And then 5 is supposed to be coming here, I think, later this year. And that whale was much larger than the killer whale, just from an inference, a graphical comparison's sake, to kind of give an idea of like, this is going to be a whole lot bigger than even 4 is capability of. So where are we kind of going, at least this year, 2024, that we can at least potentially foresee?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I would say opinions are mixed, because the big question is what they call the data wall. And so if you imagine all these models are being trained on data from the internet and that humans have created. And so there's a question about whether it can only exceed that level of intelligence, or whether it can either hit that level of intelligence, or it could exceed it and continue on the growth curve. I think it can definitely continue on the growth curve personally. And I say that because what are the odds that we randomly stumbled upon the peak of AI performance in the 2 years that this has blown up? It feels pretty strange to think that it's just over, right? No, humans can't innovate anymore. We can't get any better.
Yeah.
It seems pretty silly to think that it would stop there. But I mean, we still have a lot of time in this year. I'm hopeful for a GPT-5 release, and I've heard no leaks to know how significantly better or worse it is than GPT-4. But what's really interesting to me is whether or not it's going to be multimodal.
Sure.
So 4.0 is now multimodal in a really unique paradigm way that I don't think people realize yet, and it's because hardly anyone has their hands on it yet. So the voice input or the audio input and audio output aspect of GPT 4.0 is not released, even though some people are confused by that. So in ChatGPT, on the mobile app and the desktop app, you can now choose like the headphones option. If you click the headphone options, you're now talking with the AI. And what that's doing is it's converting what you say into text and then putting that text into the model.
Correct.
But it actually has the capability, the support for streaming in your audio, just your voice, straight into the model instead of converting it to text first. And this is what they showcased on their keynote if you didn't watch it. And so I'm really curious now, when you're talking about forward-looking, will 5 have that same capability? Or are they going to develop it as a text-only model at first?
Right.
Because it would still be wildly useful if it's smarter than human experts in every field, right? I mean, what could we accomplish if there's a model that could answer any question about any industry and answer above human level?
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, I do think we'll see GPT-5 released this year. I don't know if it will be a huge leap or a small leap, but even a small leap will advance lots of industries, and I think really be groundbreaking.
I want to go into the security portion of this here in a second, but before we do, just continuing on that case as far as industry side of things, like personally, obviously I own real estate and insurance businesses and so forth. Obviously most of you all know that, but I've already started internally trying to find as many ways to implement this as possible, not lose the person-to-person touch that you never want to lose, the human-to-human element type of scenario. But I fully believe that, for example, say in insurance, like is mostly my day job, that those agencies are not going to get and agents are not necessarily going to be replaced by AI.
Sure.
But I would argue there's a strong case that those who are leveraging it are going to slowly last, and those who are not using it are not going to be able to last. And that's probably the same reference when people were talking about websites and using websites for those that or digital currency with credit cards and we're only cash only type of scenario.
Right.
And so I think those who are not implementing it are going to probably regret not doing so or see their business decline in that way. So from that standpoint, well, obviously me and you have had a lot of conversations about different ways to, I can add this, and one of the ways we're working on it right now is, like you talked about with the LLM, you can almost, again, there's these ideas you can kind of assistants or things out there where you can kind of train it or give it a knowledge base that you are trying to specifically point it to that might be more specifically unique to your business or my business. That's different than just the general knowledge on the internet, right? Yeah. And so obviously we've talked about, I'm revamping currently our, I say intranet, but a lot of times it's basically the internal website of our agency where and implementing AI so that it's educated on our use case of the knowledge that we use between underwriting questions and carrier information and policy information and so forth, and even having it being able to transcribe things in a much quicker, fast-paced scenario. So and again, it's just saving us, sometimes 5, sometimes up to 10 times the speed as far as us to be able to do things, right? Yep. And so I think that is just the first step of that aspect of, if you have a business that has a lot of interesting, specific knowledge base, that like you got to sit there in Google Drive or Microsoft Teams stuff, and it's all there, and you want to be able to access it like that, being able to kind of use what would you call an LLM that's more just focused internally on what you specifically, it's like obviously doing the same thing, but it's you just pointing it to as a smaller brain, so to speak. Right,
yeah. So basically what it's called in the industry is like retrieval augmented generation. Okay. And so if you want to give it the ability to access documents, to basically retrieve information and use that as context for its answers, it would typically be called a RAG, like retrieval augmented generation system, or you could even just call it an LLM with tools or something like that. Right. But in general, like you said, it's kind of an internal chatbot is really I think what most people would call them, but it would have access to information where sometimes they wouldn't. I think you're extremely right on all the points you mentioned. Like I think that people who embrace it and kind of learn how to use it now are going to be they're going to be set up for success going forward. And I do think that they'll be able to take a greater market share in whatever industry they're in, because basically they're able to be more efficient. Yeah. Right. It's like the same as hiring like top of the line employees. When you give all of your employees access to these tools that give them greater leverage or greater efficiency, then they're going to be able to, like you said, focus more on the human to human elements. They're going to be able to make more calls or more meetings or, spend more time face to face with their clients instead of just basically sitting there doing data entry or looking through your documents for or parsing policies, like being able to use AI for those things, I think is like a really key use case. Yeah. Yeah. And actually one thing I did want to say was I feel like you've done a great job of leaning into it, both personally and professionally, and I think that's really key. Yeah, I mean, it's something I'm like, I want to be aware of these things and what's happening and not get left behind, because, and I think there's the tendency, even as I'm getting older, to kind of have more of that mentality of I'm just going to almost ignore it as if it's, I don't know, this makes me uneasy. This is kind of too weird for me type of scenario. Like I said, very Terminator movie-esque type of stuff. And so I'm just going to ignore it. But obviously I can't do that, and that's not the mature thing, I would argue, and so forth like that. I mean, you have had a lot of, conversations about just education and the education system, and we don't have to really dive into that, but really what does that mean for the education system as a whole when the AI and things and a lot of jobs are going to get replaced. So for me, and I think a lot of people from an entrepreneur or their business or something like that, there's an idea where, for me personally, I started an agency 5 years ago, and I expect to be able to potentially grow an agency to 3, 4, maybe 5 times bigger than I think was ever possible with the same amount of with a certain amount of people. Yeah. Whereas
5 years ago,
Sure.
you would have needed 2, 3, 4, 5 times the amount of people to get to that size of an agency in some respects. Obviously, there's a lot of caveats there within that statement, but ultimately, that's my mindset. I think that's an appropriate mindset of like, I should be able to leverage this in a way that doesn't take away from the person-to-person, human-to-human interaction, but is able to leverage it in a growth model way to be able to do a lot more work with fewer people, which is kind of what the internet did originally to businesses to begin with.
And I will say, I feel like one thing sometimes people do is they lump in the baby with the bathwater with AI. Like, I think a lot of what's enabling you to do that now and get started on that path is your desire to automate. Like, honestly, a lot of the automation you're using isn't AI, right?
Yeah.
But it's like AI is helping you along the way.
Sure.
Or maybe you're leveraging AI to learn what to do or how to automate it, right? Like, I know one huge automation platform is Zapier. And I know you use it a lot. I'm sure you've asked ChatGPT, like, hey, I'm getting this error in Zapier. How do I fix it, right? So you're actually using it to
Or even if you want to do
troubleshoot.
Excel spreadsheets, like I've just done that recently.
Yeah, give me some.
There's an error here. I
formulas.
can't figure out. There's like a colon or whatever missing.
Right.
I just plugged it in and boom, found it in 1 second and told me, here's where the error is.
That's right. And so I do think that's the same for other industries. I think that basically, there's probably things that business owners are already not automating that they could automate.
Oh, yeah.
And I think AI can help them brainstorm what they could automate, help them along the errors they're getting along the way, and then eventually there are going to be things that previously were not able to be automated that now can be automated as a result of AI.
Yeah. And it's interesting in the sense that as we move closer and closer to that, like some of the other things I think they're obviously going to be down the future, or we know they're already down the future, and I think this will lead more into the security portion of the conversation, which is, obviously there is the aspect of being able to, one thing I foresee down the road here is being able to implement training videos or things, or even video quotes or other things of that nature, where it is my quote unquote video avatar with my voice, and it is just reproducing this in a video format off of inputted text or PDF or something like that, which leads us into the idea of like music and video that's being created based upon text prompt, and just where the security of that goes. And won't get into politics, but they're already starting to lean into just claiming videos are already fake and stuff like that. And so from a security standpoint, there's a lot of interesting things, and we talk about that. And I think I obviously get that. I mean, a lot of people are going to be very nervous about this, which is why a lot of times I ask you, like, hey, yo, dude, how should I feel about this? Do you think it's okay? Where are we at and with this and so forth? Like, so I mean, speak to that as far as the security aspect. Obviously, that's an ever-moving target.
Yeah, it is.
Where stuff is maybe you find people are worried about something that they shouldn't be as worried about. Maybe the places that are appropriate to be worried. Yeah.
So I think like the idea that a large language model is going to like jump out of the computer and kill us all Terminator style is like a little bit overblown a lot overblown, right? The odds of that happening, even in the distant future, seem very unlikely to me. There's a lot of great research on what's called alignment, which is like aligning AI models with what humans believe should be done, like where they're like basically almost instilling morality in it, which I know you and I have a lot of strong feelings on. But outside of that, I do think that there are some concerns with cumulative risk. So one way I've been thinking about this is that the single risk of AI killing us is low. The odds of job displacement being so bad that we can't cope with it, it's going to happen slowly. We're probably going to cope with it, right? But the odds that their job displacement causes some sort of civil unrest is probably pretty low. But let's like lump that into the same bucket as the risk of AI killing us all. And then you have like the risk of what I would call AI security. So all of these places AI is being implemented, especially by these small companies, like these little indie companies, SaaS, B2B companies, they're moving really fast, and they're using AI to generate a lot of the code, and some of that code is insecure, and then some of the ways they're implementing it's insecure. So that builds a little bit more into our cumulative risk bucket, right? And then whenever you think about the fact that there's some safety and bias issues here, so I'm not individually concerned about this, but I do think as we implement it at scale across every government agency, that the odds that it negatively affects some people groups is probably definitely going to happen in some places. I think we can work around it. I don't think it's going to be the end of the world, but I think we need to get ahead of all these problems, because the cumulative risk, as you keep stacking these up, I feel like gets to the point where maybe geopolitically with other countries and like an arms race towards getting towards AGI could become something that actually does start to affect the layperson. But I mean, it's not to the point where I'm even remotely concerned. I think we still need to run towards it because there's so much benefit that can be had. it's kind of interesting the way people are scared of the added utility and value from, like, let's say, like they're worried about job displacement. But what I think about is like huge GDP and utility gains.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I think that it'll definitely work well.
And expand upon that just a little bit more as far as that goes.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that people might be concerned that there are going to be like lots of job loss from AI, for example. And I think that in general, my hope for them would be that they're less worried about it because one, it's going to happen really slowly. Two, it's going to create new jobs. But three, it's just complete added utility and function and GDP to the human race, basically, right? It's going to, like, as we have automated more things through the past, whether it's printing press or vehicles displacing cars, or whether it's guns displacing bow and arrows, like whatever. This happens in humanity. It's never happened this fast, and that's what gives me a little bit of pause.
Yeah, that's a great point, because we talked about that, like the idea of the internet. There was the internet boom, or the .com boom, as we talked about, so is commonly known. And initially people thought, oh, it's going to be huge, and then they were like, no one really adopted it like we thought, and so forth, and then it kind of slowly and eventually really
built.
What was that time frame? Maybe a 10-year time frame of a build before
for the internet to take off. That's what I would say. Yeah.
I mean, so before that, but we're talking about in 24 months, it has been just a giant explosion.
Well, I would say it was more like 1 or 2 months when they went from 0 to like 100 million users like instantly.
Oh, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was insane.
So I think we could see that with other things. Like, let's say GPT-5 were to drop, and it could legitimately replace employees everywhere. I mean, people are going to adopt it like hotcakes. But it just takes so much time, right? Like, these business owners are going to have to figure out how to use it. And honestly, I think that people are still underestimating the difficulty with implementing agents. Yeah. Because an agent is not just
Explain what an agent is, I guess, for those who don't know.
So there's a wide array of agents. Generally, people mean...
Because an agent really... When we talk, I had to wrap my head. It's more like when people think AI is just doing something for you, rather than really AI is trained on what you've told it to do. Whereas an agent is more or less can kind of communicate for us. Is that a better way of putting it?
I would say it's one that like is making its own decisions about what to do and when to stop. Yeah. And also the ability to interact with humans via tools. Yeah. So like if you think about, there's the most common one that came out. There's some hype around it, but it also seems to be slightly overhyped. It's called Devon, and it's a coding assistant that has access to Slack and GitHub and some other tools. So basically, it can like write code, check it in, but it can also DM you and be like, it can direct message you on Slack and say, hey, I'm programming this up, but I need to know how to implement this feature. Can you tell me how it should be done? You can reply and say, do it this way, and then it will do it, right?
That's wild.
Yeah, and so I think that we'll see that, but it will have to be built per industry. Like, you can't drop Devon into doing insurance adjuster's job, because it doesn't have access to the right tools. And so I think people, when they say, oh, we're going to have agents and they're just going to take everyone's jobs, it's like, well, you're going to have specific companies building specific agents for specific roles in your company, and that's just going to take time to implement, right? It's going to be amazing.
The easiest way I think I put this, and the way I explain it to a lot of people, is that I was a musician my whole life, and from an orchestra, like with violins, all these instruments, and you have a director up front. Not director, conductor, thank you. A conductor is that, and ultimately I think the good analogy for those to kind of wrap their heads around is that we all ultimately have to start becoming the conductor.
Sure.
Whereas I don't need to know the violin, how to play the violin, how to play the oboe. I need to know what those are capable of and what I'm wanting to get from them. But in essence, I don't need all these people manually playing those instruments in that case. As a kind of a loose, I think, imagery, I think I try to use.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it almost scales up to like bigger companies. Like, for example, you would need like conductors of coding agents. Yeah. So like some random CEO can't be the conductor of everything. Yeah. But as long as you have a conductor of your coding agents and a conductor of your PR agents and a conductor of your, if that makes sense. So yeah, like an insurance company, once you scale big enough, you would want like a conductor for each role, basically.
Yeah. And in some ways, I think from a small business perspective, there's a lot of times where you have a fractional CTO, Chief Technical Officer, but that's probably been wrapped up just in more of a network security and your network type of side of things, whereas it probably becomes more of a standard businesses growing from a true CTO standpoint of implementing technology in a different way within your ecosystem of your business, or potentially just that's a whole new position that eventually, if you get to that point, that you would have hired out in your business as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're going to have infrastructure for your agents and for your human staff, right? Like they need to find ways to collaborate. You're still going to have to install software, expose tools to the agents. You're still going to have to guide them and tell them like, hey, here's where our documents are. Here's how we do this. You'll have to correct them. For a long time, we're going to have to vet everything they do, right? Because it's like we're not going to necessarily trust that they spelled the middle name right. You know,
you got to have guardrails up.
Exactly.
100% for sure. In that sense. So, I mean, it's going to be wild, and it already has been insanely wild, I think, just in this short time that we've seen this and so forth. And that's obviously why I wanted to bring you on today, which is kind of, let's talk about this. Like I said, a lot of people are very iffy about it, or maybe still haven't really explored or seen what it is.
Sure.
What would you say if someone's interested? Is there some good people to follow, read? I know you obviously have some stuff that might be on another little level, like for someone that's really been into it, or maybe they just start playing around with the free versions of OpenAI, which is ChatGPT stuff, to kind of see what it's capable of.
Yeah, I think people don't realize how low friction that is. To just, especially now that you can use 4.0 for free.
Yeah.
So I would, no doubt, everyone should be just using ChatGPT or Claude as just when there's a question you want to ask that maybe you didn't get the right answer from Google, right? Or you Googled it and you couldn't figure it out, or it was too difficult or annoying. Just switch over and ask ChatGPT, ask Claude, because I think that they're often able to synthesize it in a contextual way that's way more relevant to you.
Yep.
And so outside of that, I would say, feel free to follow me on my blog, josephthacker.com.
Okay.
There are definitely some technical posts, but there are lots of non-technical posts as well.
And you're very active on X. What's your X handle?
Yeah, it's Rezo, REZ0__ on X. I'm nearing in on 50K followers, so I'm excited about that. But
let's get this guy to 50K.
Yeah, much more technical content there, but honestly, I don't have specific. I have specific people that I recommend to follow if you're like deep into like AI security, or deep into like bug bounty hacking,
which we're probably not. So,
which most people probably aren't. But yeah, I mean, I think staying up on the space, like you said, is really key. I'm sure you'll continue to share stuff with business owners and real estate and insurance people about where that's going. If people do have any questions, they can comment on any of your LinkedIn posts of this, and I can go in there and answer them later. So
that's absolutely sure. And just for a hack for any parents out there, ChatGPT is great for as me and Joseph, I've obviously done with our kids, of writing bedtime stories where it will make a story based upon the parameters that they want to give it.
Making or AI art for them.
And then AI coloring pages or art type of scenario. And then even there's music ones where it's been making custom songs or videos for our kids.
Is it Suno.com?
Yes, Suno is what you've sent me with that. Yeah. So, but ChatGPT, OpenAI is probably the easy way to get it into it, or at least start exploring it, so you're not kind of, for lack of better words, left in the dust, so to speak, because it's quickly going to be implemented in most fabrics of society in one way or another, whether we like it or not. We're this close between me not being able to call into companies and legitimately not know I'm talking to an AI.
Sure.
Because normally you could kind of figure it out, and there's a lot of times we could be like, oh, I could tell. But we're this close to it, like I cannot tell. We cannot tell. The video was made up by AI, the song, whatever you're talking to on the phone. Yeah, and I think people don't realize that, or maybe like there's no way, but legitimately that's the case. So well, cool. Sweet. Joseph, appreciate your time. Again, let's have a conversation again sometime, probably down in the near future. We'll kind of go from there.
Perfect. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thanks for coming. We'll see everybody back on the next episode of Keys to Commonwealth Podcast.